Presenting today, we have Martha Hollowell, ASCENT author and Autodesk certified instructor. I'll now pass things over to Martha. So Martha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Corrine. So welcome, everyone. As Corrine said, we are going to be talking about our Revit 2016 MEP Fundamentals Training Guide today. That is such a long name, so I'm probably just going to shorten it to MEP as we go along. Just a little bit about me, if you haven't been on one of my webcasts before. I have been working with Autodesk products since 2.5 of AutoCAD, which is quite some time ago. So I did AutoCAD, then I moved into Architectural Desktop, both of those using them within the architectural world. Then I became an instructor, and from being an instructor, I also became a writer, and I now write full-time about Revit. And I started Revit architecture in version 5, I think. I don't know how many years ago that is now, but I've been doing that for quite a long time. Between training and writing, I've been working with Autodesk products and specifically Revit for the last number of years. So the purpose of today's webcast is to help instructors and other users get up to speed using the new layout and practices in the Autodesk Revit 2016 MEP Fundamentals Training Guide. So there you go. Last time you're going to hear the full name. But first of all, I'd like to know who is on the webcast. So here is the first of our polls, and I would like to know, are you an instructor, user, CAD manager, student, anything else? So if you could just take a couple of seconds and give me a little answer. So you pick the button, and then down at the bottom there's a little submit option.
We've got lots of people filling this out, so that's great. I still see responses coming in here, Martha.
Okay. I'm going to submit myself as an instructor.
Okay, I think most people have. So if you just want to, there's another few seconds left before I close it. If you haven't had a chance to respond, please do so. Okay. So I'm just closing, I've closed the poll. It takes a few seconds, Martha, before we see any results.
Right.
So I've got another 12 seconds, just so you know. And then I'll share the results with everyone.
Okay. So I am expecting, a bunch of instructors because those are the primary people that use the book, but it'll be interesting to see who is what. Any luck yet, Corrine?
I think we should be good to go here. Let me know when you see the poll results.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
We always do have a little bit of fun with WebEx each time we come in and use it. If y'all were not here earlier hearing our switch, I had switched screens, and then my presenter view was a mess and all of that sort of thing. Ah, there we go. Well, actually, here I am surprised. We have more users than instructors in it this time. So 29% instructors, and we have a bunch of users, few CAD managers who are probably both users and instructors, and several students, and some people that don't fit in any of those categories. So welcome everybody in that. Well, let's do our next poll, and that is, how many years have you used Revit MEP? So in this case, I do want to say specifically Revit MEP. Are you a newbie? You haven't used it yet? 1 or 2 years, 3 to 5, 6 to 9. And the reason I didn't put it any higher than 9 is because MEP came out in 2006. So you couldn't have used it before that point in time. You may have been using Revit Architecture or what they called Revit Building at the time.
That could have been a good trick question.
Yeah, that's it.
I still see some responses here coming through.
Okay.
But if everyone can put in their responses now, then we can close the survey up.
Yeah, I did look up, when did Revit come out, and when did MEP specifically come out, and when did we start writing our books? And just so you'll know, we did not start writing our Revit MEP book until 2010, because until that point, it wasn't as viable of I guess you could say the program wasn't working as well as you'd like. So we started it when it started being used by more and more people. And as everyone has probably seen who's been in it a while, they have improved Revit MEP immensely. So I think that's good. So I see the poll has ended, and I'm assuming that Corinne's working on that to find out what we have.
I am.
Yay.
Do let me know when you see it.
Okay. So this little Revit icon that they came in, it's like, I wonder if anybody has ever built a building that looks something like that using Revit. I'm sure they probably have. Okay, there we go. Ooh, whole bunch of new users. That is very interesting. So I will tailor the class a little bit more. You are not going to learn Revit MEP in this class thoroughly, because this really is more about changes, but it will give you a foundation to be able to get in there and really work on the book. So we've got the next largest group is people who've been using it for a long time. So that'll be very interesting to see what everyone thinks about that. Okay, great. We can close the poll and head on out. So my plan of attack for today is I'm going to talk about several areas. I'm going to talk about general changes that we've made not only to Revit MEP, but all of our Revit books. I'm then going to talk about specifically about our reorganized content that's in Revit MEP, all of the practice model updates that we have done. So we've done quite a bit of that. And finally, a part of what's next. So let's start with our general changes. As I mentioned, these general changes are applicable throughout our Revit books. In this particular slide is actually showing you an example from Revit architecture, but I felt like it was a useful one to see here. This isn't exclusively, but we have added a lot more bullets to make it easier to read. So what was originally in a paragraph, we now have as bullets. So you can see here, we know adding ceiling fixtures, lighting fixtures, mechanical equipment, specialty equipment. You've got, quickly at your view, it's very easy to catch the information. Another thing we had was more captions. So in previous versions, you might have seen this, which didn't make much sense. Now it's a lot more useful. You can actually see, okay, this is the contextual tab. That's the options bar. These are your drawing aids. So throughout, I've added a lot of captions. And some that people recommended, could you please caption this? And some that I realized needed to be captioned. Another big thing we've been working on for a number of years now is to separate our practices out a bit more. And that is in part because of the ACI, the AutoCAD and Certified Instructors methodology, in part because it's just good training method. So what we are doing now is going ahead and you teach a little bit, you do a practice. You teach a little bit, you do a practice. You teach a little bit, you do a practice. So there's a lot more coming in there. And of course, demonstrations, I didn't add that part in there, are taking place during all of these as well. So you have that cycle of the teaching about it, the demonstration, and then the actual practice. This is an example from our Chapter 11, which is the electrical systems. Before, we taught a whole bunch of stuff, and then you did a practice. And we taught a bunch more stuff, and then you did a practice. And now you can see they're separated out from 2 to 4. The bigger thing, especially for you instructors who probably, if you're the ones who have been doing it for 6 to 9 years, you've probably been doing this on autopilot. So be aware we have reorganized content. And I have it in 3 sections that I'm going to talk about today. The basics, which apply to all parts of MEP, discipline-specific chapters, which are 6 through 11, and then construction documents. So overall, that is similar, but you'll see within this there's a change in how each of those are taught. So let's take a look at the reorganized content. I'm going to go through more or less chapter by chapter. So for you newbies who are out there, this is what you're going to learn in the process of working with MEP. You're going to start with an introduction to BIM and Autodesk Revit and what it's all about and things like that. So there's not many MEP-specific changes here, a little bit of layout, things like that for instructors, but otherwise you won't see a whole lot of changes here. The first place we have changes is in our Chapter 2, the Basic Drawing and Modify Tools. And we now include in this one inserting MEP components. It's basically what we did was reorganized it to suit the MEP processes better rather than just standard Revit processes. So for Revit architecture and Revit structure, you need to know all of the line tools and draw tools and things like that, whereas in MEP, it's more important to know how to use the drawing aids and things like that so that you can put in these components. It's just a huge part of working with MEP is adding in the components. So I also broke this down so that it's not so long. So I broke it actually into 2 chapters. So this particular chapter includes move, copy, rotate, mirror, array. Those particular ones, these are all things that you can do with the MEP components. You know, so if you put a plumbing fixture in, you've put in a air terminal, you can use tools like move, copy, rotate, mirror, and array. The second part of this chapter, I'm calling it Basic Systems Tools. And so now we include in this case the real general, so we're very high end here, how to connect components using ducts, pipes, cable trays, and conduit. So you actually are connecting components at this point in time. And when they are connected, they automatically become a system. And you'll see that later for each one. But just so you'll know here, as you have, for example, in this case, some air terminals, which are off the picture, and a mechanical equipment, the ducts, when they are connected to the air terminals, already automatically create a system that you can then use for other things. So in this chapter, we also talk about the basics of creating systems, if you haven't connected things, and also using a tool called the Systems Browser, or System Browser, a very important part of using Revit. So in here, because you need more linear elements to do this, we have align, trim and extend, split, and offset. Align you can use with anything, but some of the others, it really is specifically for the linear elements like the pipe and duct and cable tray. And by the way, in this one, the practices use example from each of the disciplines. So in our Chapter 2 and 3, we have a simplified practice model, and what you do is you actually build up from scratch. So instead of having some things in here and you're trying to use these things, we actually do have a building that you build on. And so let me just quickly show you this particular practice right here. This is towards the end of the practices, and you can see here's some of our electrical things. We've put in lighting fixtures. There's a switch. Here's some cable trays. And so the number of things are happening there. If I go and take a look at, let's see, I want to get mechanical, electrical, 3D. We'll just pull up a 3D here. So here's a 3D example, and you can see it has all of the others in here as well. So you have connecting pipes that are connecting. There, you can see that. We have right here, there's one of the air terminals. So each group does some work. Primarily, it starts with the plumbing, though, and it kind of builds. So everything you learn for one is going to work in all the others as well. Okay. The next chapter, Chapter 4, is starting our systems project. So the previous chapters, I wanted to make sure everyone felt like, okay, I'm just learning these tools. I'm not trying to build a real building yet, because you really just need to know how to use the tools. But now we're actually going to start on the building, and from this point on, there's a building that is being worked on throughout the time that you are in the class. So those of you who have not yet used the book, this is where you start working on the school building is what's in here. This one is fairly similar to previous in the sense that it's linking Revit models, adding in the levels, using Copy Monitor, focusing on the levels in this case. And then we do teach batch copy. So if you have lots of plumbing fixtures, architectural people have already placed plumbing fixtures, you can use batch copy to get those into your MEP file, and coordination review. So not a huge change in this one, but it is a bit of the practice has been streamlined and also cut to be shorter times between topics and practices. Chapter 5 is the last of our basics, and it's working with views. Again, most of the view tools are used by all versions of Revit. One specific tool that is in MEP is the filters for graphic overrides. It's a very, very important tool, so we include that so that you can see how to do the graphic overrides. And here in this example, we're showing just sanitary systems and not domestic cold water and hot water. So that's a usefulness of this particular tool. And again, as I mentioned, practices are separated out more. Chapters 6 and 7 are where we really kind of start going into our discipline specific. Spaces can be used by any group, but they are frequently used primarily by HVAC as they are working into the zones so they can do the energy analysis for heating and cooling loads. So this one, I kind of lump this under HVAC. But instructors, if you are teaching a class with multiple people, multiple disciplines in it, spaces might be something that everyone would like to find out about, because you can use spaces in a variety of ways that gives you the feel of the depth of each of the rooms that are in the building. So here's where I made a lot of changes. HVAC networks. In the previous version, we had an HVAC chapter, and then we had a hydronic piping chapter. And guess what? They were almost exactly the same, except for the pictures, because some showed pipe and some showed ductwork. So what we did was we actually took that overlap and brought it together. So this particular chapter now includes ducts and hydronic piping. They're created in the exact same way. So all of the modification tools are available for both, and so you have a much more in-depth process now. So in this chapter, you are learning more about inserting specific kinds of MEP elements for HVAC, the mechanical equipment, the air terminals, and linking those together with ducts, and then adding the pipe in for your hydronic piping. I call this chapter HVAC networks because we are not covering anything about systems specifically in this particular chapter. As I mentioned before, when you put these together, when you put the lines together, the elements, the components with the connectors together, they automatically create systems. So in this particular chapter, just talking about how you do all of this. Chapter 9 is our plumbing networks. And again, I did want to pull this one out separately. So even though hydronic piping and plumbing piping are exactly the same method in Revit MEP, it's not the same people frequently. So you really need to know a bit more about plumbing. So this is, in a sense, a repeat of much that was in the previous one, focusing on the piping, with the addition in this case of sloped piping. It can be taught if you're not teaching any of the HVAC specific information, and vice versa. So you don't have to teach this if you aren't teaching people who are plumbing engineers. So here's where we get to the more advanced systems. This Chapter 10 is used for both HVAC and plumbing, and once again, there was so much overlap. You don't need 3 times being told how to create automatic layouts or how to create systems without connecting the various components. So this is the advanced systems practice area, and this teaches you how to create systems without connecting the elements, as you can see in this picture here, how to create the automatic layouts, and also about testing systems. There are separate practices for HVAC and plumbing. So again, if you're one or the other, you can choose which practice you want to do. Here's our electrical systems practice or chapter. This one has always been separate and always been able to stand alone. It's, needless to say, very different in the people that are working in it. In the electrical have different focuses, different purposes, and things like that. So this includes all of the, bringing in the components, creating the systems, as you can see here, a switch system. And you don't really need to know how to, you don't need to put those connectors in the system because most of the time it's not something that needs to show. But then you have the cable tray and conduit, which are similar to your ducts and pipes, but again, they aren't necessarily connecting any specific items. They're there to hold the wires, which are rarely drawn in any kind of a building design. So again, we did bring together overlapping material within this, and you can see how to place electrical components. We just gave you all the different kind of electrical components you can add in. These are individual tools that you can choose, but the methodology is exactly the same. So whether you're putting in a lighting fixture or a security device, methodology is the same. Whether you're creating a switch system or whether you're creating a data system, it doesn't really matter. Those methodologies are exactly the same. So in the teaching part, we have coalesced those together. Again, separated out the practices more. I mentioned that earlier. The final part of the book is the construction documents book, and really the only main change that was here for MEP is I took all the draw tools, which were previously in one of the earlier ones, and I brought them into the annotation chapter where it makes more sense in MEP. So this, when you're drawing detail lines, you need to know how to use all the various detail line tools like rectangles and arcs and things like that. So that's really probably the main difference that you're going to see in the construction documents. And for people who are just starting and have not yet used the book, this includes how to create sheets, which are your title blocks, how to put all the annotation, text, dimensions, detail lines, things like that, working with tags and schedules, and then creating details and more than just detail lines. Well, Corrine, have there been any questions that have come through?
No, Martha, we're okay right now.
Okay, good. All right. So now I'm going into the next big change, the practice model update. I've worked with a number of instructors who helped me rebuild these models. They are not perfect, so and not all of them have been updated, so do be aware of that. But we worked on these to make them more usable in class and more, in a sense, real world. So what I want to do first is go quickly through the changes and then show you what they look like in the practice files themselves. First of all, I cleaned up the architectural model. The architectural model had grids in it, and if you created a view in MEP, those grids showed up, and they were a pain because you had to turn them off. And in this case also, I don't know if you can see, but some of the grids are going one way and some the other. Some people said, this is awful, how can you have your grids wrong? So what I did was I deleted them. So there are no more grids in the architectural model. In this case, it really doesn't matter, two-story building, and it has, for the most part, the supporting walls. So anyway, I didn't feel like losing the grids was going to be a big problem for MEP. And now when you create a view, it's not going to all of a sudden throw in some grids for you. Another thing I cleaned up in the architectural model was changing the toilet fixtures and some other fixtures, but this is a good example. The toilet fixtures are actually 2D in the previous architectural model. So I didn't actually recognize that was what was causing our problems when we were copy and monitoring in. And so thank you to the instructor who helped me work that particular one out. So what I've done, they're now replicas in the architectural the architectural model has replicas of the MEP fixtures, but the connectors for pipes and things have been removed. So this is just going to make it a little bit easier with copy monitor and when you're working through the various parts of the model. Another thing I did was clean up views, and instead of having the students clean up the views and practices, I cleaned them up myself. So they're already cleaned up in the practice file some. Now there's some where you need to clean them up because that's the purpose of what you're learning at that particular case. But you can see here in this lighting view plan, in 2015 it had conduit, it had some occupancy sensors that were not needed in a lighting plan. So in 2016, went ahead and just turned those off, hid them, so they are no longer showing in that particular view. Now this is the section I want to go ahead and bring up Revit again. The things that we've done are, you can kind of divide them into 4 parts: real world layouts, easier connections, custom families, and room to practice. Now, before I go into it, I do want to say it's always a bit dangerous to talk about anything real world in the context of a training class. So if you've ever taken CPR, I'm sure you preferred to learn on a dummy instead of having to learn how to do CPR in a real person. So in a sense, these files are dummies. They're not dumb, but they aren't real, and they're not totally complete. But we did do a few things to make them look less formulaic. And we also just made things a lot easier to do without sacrificing the application of what you're learning. So let me go ahead now and bring up Revit again. Let's see, which one am I in? Oops. All right, so this is our HVAC sample. This is from the 2015 HVAC sample. And a couple things that were very noticeable if you knew anything about HVAC was you had an area over here, let's see if there you go, over in this area, where you have 2 totally separate rooms connected with one system. That's really not something you would have, so we've broken that apart. And then this little system over in here, you can see that area in the office, was just kind of messy. So what we did, and I'll show you now in our 2016, for one thing, there you can see I mentioned the open practice space, a lot more spaces where you can do things. Here we've gone over here. We have now gone ahead and separated this. These are now in 2 separate systems, and we've cleaned this up. And to see that a little bit more, let me just go into the mechanical plan. Some of the things that we did was put in a nicer set of ductwork with the taps coming in here before the taps were actually going through. And this little guy right here was coming off the corner, and several people mentioned that. It's like, we don't do it that way. So he's now, this little one's coming off here and is in a much more useful position. Another thing we did in this particular case, instead of leaving everything exactly the same size, they're changing in size. So here's our ducts right here, a 14 by 12. This duct is now 14 by 8. This duct down here is a 10 by 8. And you're seeing how the changes happen and how they automatically happen throughout that. Another little thing we did that, again, just saved a bit of time and is, you're still learning everything you need to, But when we have the students insert these guys, the mechanical AHUs, air handling units, we just make sure that all of the piping, you can see here's like the piping right there, is facing out to the hall. So before you actually had to take that piping around and under and making sure you weren't hitting the ductwork, this is a much more elegant solution, and so it'll be more useful and easier to draw in the first place, but then also a little bit more real world from what you would actually have. And a number of people have asked that we have some additional practices that aren't working step by step. So while we don't have any ones written up specifically for those of you who are trainers and also the new users and the people learning it, go ahead and then take these blank spaces. And once you've put together this right here, you can easily learn how to put together the rest of them and replicate them. So it's a very standard kind of a process of what you need to do in each room. So it's not a big problem to figure it out yourself, what's needed. Once you've done the practice, the basic practice, then you can go ahead and build on that practice. Let's see what that looks like in plumbing. So in our plumbing practices, this was the 2015 version right now, pretty complex. And also you can see a lot has been done already. Now this is not the earliest file of what you're working on, but you do have a lot that you're doing. And we also had a very complicated, this area over in here, right here, was very complicated, and what we had you do was replicate it over here. That was way too cumbersome, and you really weren't necessarily learning it very well. So what we did is change it around 2016. It's our 3D view. Whole lot less you can see there in the file. This one's not going to be really helpful to see. But what we did do is, let's see our floor plan. We made it a bit more real world. For one thing, if you can see over here, here's our cold water piping. We actually started it on a place where it comes into the building. So before, it was just, you were just connecting pipe and you didn't really care where it came from. So in this case, we're actually now having it connect into the thing. There's a new area that now that you're doing this is where you're going to be focusing a lot of your work. And in here, these little plumbing fixtures here are ones that we updated. Now in the past, what I've tried to do is use out of the box of the families, and they just aren't necessarily really easy to use. So what we've done in this case is just made the process a little easier to use to get you learning. This is the purpose of this class. This is fundamentals. Get you working with them. So what we've got now is, whoopsie, I just moved him. Don't want to do that. Undo. Undo is a really good button to know new people. Okay, here we go. So here's our little family here, and you can see the connectors are coming directly off out into the back. We're not worrying about how all of it connects right up here because in most cases you aren't going to do that for all of your connections. You'll probably have one that'll show here's the specific way this particular sink is plumbed. Another thing that's kind of interesting that we do in this one is we have it so that you do one set. So you're going to start working on this set right here, this and this. Then we have you copy it. So once you've got everything plumbed up, you can just copy that grouping and then clean everything up and how it's going to work. And one other thing that we did, let me see if I have our drainage here. To teach the 3D restroom section, there it is. To teach the sloped piping, instead of doing the much more complex one when you have to do it with the toilets, what we did was you put in drains. and then the floor drains, and then you do your sloped piping with the floor drains. So again, the tool that you can do beyond that then is to go ahead, now that you've learned how to do the sanitary system here, to go ahead and then apply it to the other ones that are available. So the things really here, like I said, we tried to get it a bit more real world. We didn't have any floor drains before, so now they're floor drains. That's a good one. And we've got the easier connections so that you're learning how to use the process rather than getting around the situation. And we helped that out in partly by custom families and simplified practices to a point, but without losing what it is you wanted to do. And of course, the room for practice. So here we have gone ahead and we've talked about some of our general changes that were made throughout the book, like the bullets and the captions, things like that. Talked about the reorganized content and how the new methodology keeps you from having to repeat things, but is now more streamlined, both for teaching and using the product. And then we did a number of practice model updates that will help you learn how to do this, and for those who are teaching, will help your students learn how to do it without some of the, if I can use the word convoluted a little bit much, some that were a little bit too difficult and you weren't learning how to use the tool, you were learning how to make a workaround. So what's next? First of all, I wanted you to see, here's the plan of attack for the rest of my life this year. All the various Revit books that are going to be coming out. The ones in red are the ones that we've already got out: Architecture Fundamentals, MEP Fundamentals, Structure Fundamentals. Probably by the end of the week, the Structure Fundamentals for Metric will be out. So that's, I've given that over to the people that need to do whatever it is they do to make sure you can get the book. So that one's ready to go. And I do also want to mention that as I was doing the Revit MEP Fundamentals metric version, I came across some things I really wanted to improve and make things work smoother in the Imperial version. So we have put out, or it's processing right now, a version 2 of MEP Fundamentals. So if for instructors, make sure you have the version 2 if your students are using version 2. There are little changes here and there. It's not like a total rewrite or anything like that, but it would definitely help to have the version 2. After that, I'm turning on to our BIM management. Here's our the next one. This is one of my favorite, the template and family creation. Just a lot of fun to create those families, and as you could see, I had to go in and change a few in MEP to make them work better for what we wanted for this. So that'll be out next month, the Imperial version of that. Now, I do have another poll coming up, so Corrine, if you could pop up that poll. What would you like to see in the next version of our MEP training guide? These are just ones I thought of, more content, less content, new chapter order, new model, or anything else. And even as you just do this right now and give us a few little options, I'm always open to hearing constructive criticism. Don't just tell me the book's awful. That will not be helpful. But if you say, oh, on this page, I found it more difficult to do steps 3, 4, and 5, you know, I'm very open to hearing that and working on and creating it better. That's really a lot of why we made the changes in this version of MEP.
Okay, another few seconds left in the poll here, so if you want to put in your answers now before it closes, that would be great. Okay, I just need a few seconds here for it to tabulate everything.
Right. So for any of you instructors who are working right now and teaching the BIM class, that is my next one I mentioned that I'm doing. So this is the time you want to send me any questions, concerns, ideas, things like that, because now it's the time I can actually roll them into the BIM class. And I do appreciate your insights from your using it in your classes and what your students have to say.
You should be able to see the results there, Martha.
Yes. So nobody wants less content. For the more content people, could you type in the chat what kind of content it is you're looking for?
They have been here, so I'm going to just make sure that I capture that information.
Okay, good.
Or on the other, I think, actually.
Yeah, and any of the things. I mean, you know, the various changes that you'd like to see, getting more specifics would be really, really helpful. Okay. Well, let me turn it back over to Corrine, and she will tell you more.
Yes. Just want to let you know we have all these available in a printed spiral-bound student guide, so this being our book that Martha's talking about. We have an ebook version, which is the same great content as the printed book. But if you prefer, you know, digital and you have an iPad, this is fantastic for you. We have video enhanced ebooks, so those are coming for 2016 soon. I don't know, Martha, if you have any word on the dates on when those will be out. I know we have certainly for 2015. Okay. We do have them for 2015, and so we've incorporated videos into some of our ebooks, which is another fabulous way to learn. And I think, Martha, you've already talked about the instructor tools for this one as well that we do offer, I think, for all of the titles. For Revit, you have instructor tools available?
Yes. Yeah, so we don't necessarily have slides yet. Those might be coming later, but we do have the instructor tools that includes, you know, your timing, all the answers to the questions and things like that.
Right. Perfect. So that's what we have available. And then on our last slide, I just wanted to share with you the ways that you can contact us and how you can purchase those books. So we have an online